the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today I'm throttling down the West Coast to visit with Barry Perlman. Barry, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jen. I'm super excited.
I am also excited to have you on because you're located in Palm Springs, which is the birthplace of one of my favorite fantastroids. Do you know about fantastroids?
I do, and I recall them back from many years ago when we first met. Yes.
10 years ago, I know. So Wonder Bright and I were driving from LA to go to the ESAR conference in Arizona in 2014. And when we hit Palm Springs, I was like, oh my gosh, look, there's a field of beheaded palm trees. And she's like, look it up. Look it up. And so 7 Aquarius was rising. And there was this, 7 Aquarius associated with a field of beheaded palm trees. And then later in San Francisco, I was walking around with another buddy and who knew about fantastroids. And we saw on the sidewalk a beheaded palm tree. And we're like, oh my God, quick. It was 7 Aquarius on the midheaven.
I mean, that's amazing. That's part of why we love this craft. And I also love that because that's my Venus-Mercury midpoint.
Okay.
I have Venus at 4 Aquarius and Mercury at 11. So there you go.
There's a beheaded palm tree somewhere in.
Yeah. I mean, my life is palm trees now. Totally.
Hey, there it is. Awesome. Okay, so I've known you for a moment, but I have never asked you, what was your first astrology book?
My first astrology book was The Only Way to Learn Astrology, Volume 1 by Marion and Joan McEvers. The version that I had, and I don't know if it's changed, was bright orange. And I found it in a used bookstore in the Castro in the 90s. And I was out with a friend, and he and I were both in the bookstore, and we both went to the book at the same time. And basically, I fought him for it and won. And that's how I became an astrologer. So if my friend had won the book, then I don't know what would have happened.
You could have stolen it from their house.
Maybe. But for those that aren't familiar with the book, it's very basic and kind of flashcardy, which is it's basically about learning all the symbols with keywords. And I bought the book. It was late afternoon. I went home, I read it, and I was up all night reading it. And I'm a sleeper. I'm not a stay up all nighter. So that was very unusual for me. I had been bitten by this manic bug of astrology. And I got up, with my hour of sleep. And in the morning, I went out to the Psychic Eye bookshop, which was a big metaphysical bookshop that was in Hayes Valley in San Francisco at the time. And I bought volumes 2 and 3 of the same book so that I could just keep going all weekend.
Whoa.
And then at the end of the weekend, I crashed. But it was a manic introduction to astrology. Yeah.
Wow. So what inspired the tussle over the orange first volume?
I mean, I had recently been at someone's house for a dinner party, and they'd been talking about astrology, and I didn't know anything beyond my sun sign. And they brought out an ephemeris, or maybe it was even like a book that had a mini ephemeris in the back, and we were looking up placements, and they were talking about other planets. And I found all of that really fascinating, but it was dinner party conversation, so I didn't think anything of it. But then when I saw this book, I was like, oh, that was so interesting when I talked about this at the dinner party. So why don't I learn a little bit more? And so I did.
Amazing. I love that so much. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And look at you now.
And look at me now. Yeah. I mean, I'm one of the self-taught type. So I never really studied with any teachers. I just read books at the time. And, this was around the time I had just recently gotten my first email address, maybe a year or two before. So, I taught myself, and I had to go find my chart. And I remember the first time I printed my chart out off the computer, and it was a dot matrix, text graphic of my chart rather than a pretty graphics file. So I'm dating myself a little bit, but Yeah,
But those will be back in vogue now, with that like 8-bit aesthetic.
totally.
I can just see it like if you don't have a dot matrix like chart hanging on the wall, who are you? Okay, cool. So I am going to throttle you, but I don't know, Catalina Islands. It's close, close but not too far. So here we go. You are going to pack your bag. You have an ephemeris and you have 3 other books. They may or may not be astrology. What are you putting in your luggage?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So for the audience, I'm going to stick with astrology. As I was telling you earlier, I am a big reader, but I read so much and it's for pleasure. So I don't hold on to a lot of what I read so that I can just enjoy it rather than like collect books. But in terms of astrology, I would say probably one that I would want to include is The Moment of Astrology by Geoffrey Cornelius, although I'm probably not the first person that's brought this book up on your podcast before. And for those who haven't read this book, it's pretty deep and philosophical. It's not like a how to do astrology book. It's there are sort of tales that go along with sort of philosophical underpinnings of what it is we're doing. But for me, what stuck out in that book is there is a chapter about doing the right reading with the wrong chart. And the type of astrology that I practice has always leaned more into the divination aspect of astrology rather than the super straight line, lots of facts, lots of statistics, and lots of obscure techniques. So for me, it's beautiful to know that there is something sort of numinous in the practice of what we do that allows us to still provide insight, even if we have the wrong chart for some reason. And for me, that also, informs the fact that controversial opinion ahead. I don't really believe in rectification
Ooh.
because rectification is an educated guessing game that assumes that we are the experts that know the meaning of an event in someone's life, that somehow we can reverse engineer their birth chart based upon assuming that their marriage or their career highlight meant a certain thing to them and that we're looking for that symbolism in the chart. But as we know, everything means something different. One person's marriage could be a gift and the other person's marriage could be a prison. And so for me, rectification seemed like an unnecessary exercise to go through if I'm based in clients who are sitting right in front of me and they want to be helped right now. And they don't actually care if I think their birth time is 11 a.m. or 10:52 or 11:17. They just want to know right now if they're going to get the job or if he loves me or not. So for me, I assume that the right person shows up at the right moment with the right chart data and that I'm going to provide something of use to them. So all of that to say the moment of astrology kind of informs that. And so I am very drawn to anything that leads to the mystical and away from like the straight line reads on astrology.
Before you read The Moment of Astrology, did you have any moments that stand out around you had the wrong chart data, you realized after the fact, and like, what was that like? And then what was it like to have that experience after reading The Moment of Astrology?
I mean, well, there's my own chart. I had my own chart wrong for the first 6 months to year that I was doing astrology because I was born in January 1974 when there was an abnormality in daylight savings time due to the energy crisis. And so I was an hour off. I had a different degree, but the same rising sign, but it did
Okay.
move some of the houses. So, right, it wasn't as crazy as it could have been.
Who am I?
So, I've had to learn to adjust with that. But I think on a certain level, I don't really know if I ever had the wrong chart because, if someone will tell me, yeah, I was born at 12 noon, I will push on it a little bit and be like, have you looked at your birth certificate recently? Have you called a parent? But beyond that, I don't consume myself with that detail because that is less important. It's less important for me to be factually right about that than it is to be able to help someone in need who shows up as a client. And
Oh.
so I put all of my faith in the value of a moment rather than being right. And this is partly also because I come from being a know-it-all. And as I get older, I think it's about releasing the need to know and being more humble.
Yeah.
As a youngster, I was much more of a know-it-all, and I would have wanted to have the right answer. So,
Right, right. Well, also with birth, what is the right answer? I mean, I feel like in our culture, we've gotten so, like, birth and death have become so medialized. You know, we see a death on a screen and suddenly it's like an instant death. And it's like, if you've watched anything with significant body mass pass away, it's not a instant, it's a process and it takes time. Why would birth not be the other way, right? Where it's like, how do we determine whether it's first breath or cord cutting or crowning? Or like, when is the moment that the soul enters the body independent of the mother? And it might not be the same in every single case. You can't just unilaterally say it's the first breath per se, right?
what you just said is pretty deep. We can't assume it's the same in every, because births vary dramatically. I will say that, a lot of clients have brought up the question with me, more clients than, say, colleagues, about what happens if it's a cesarean, or what happens if you're electing, you're making an appointment to have the cesarean, and all of these things. And I will usually sort of say back that there's always a quirk of fate involved, because there are certain people, right? I'm sure you've met these people that make the appointment for the cesarean or to be induced because they want a certain chart for their kid. Okay. I don't know if it worked exactly to your exactly. So you're an example.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's always something like the doctor is late. The doctor had a flat
No,
tire.
exactly. Yeah, no, it's pretty phenomenal. You know, everyone knows I had a complicated pregnancy, and so they had one window of time, and I had to choose this hour or that hour, and I'm like, all right, let's do it. And then it was like, oh, that's delayed, and then we can't do this yet, and I'm like, and it just the window shut, and it was a different chart, and then all of my mentors were just like, she picked her own chart, chill.
Right.
You
It's
know?
like, can we outsmart fate? And all we can do is contribute to fate, but we don't get to control the whole thing. We get to add a little bit here and there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think also, Wendy Stacy's an astrologer who's done work on the over medicalization of day charts coming from the C-section craze.
Mm.
That's where we are in culture now. But nevertheless, okay, so the moment of astrology gives us a lot of mystical freedom in our ability to engage with helping people and not just being right, which I think is a really beautiful distinction. What is your next book?
So the next book I'm going to pick is The Lunation Cycle by Dane Rudhyar. Again, this is sort of, there's like a philosophical bent to the books that I like, because those are the ones you can keep going back to and getting something new out of, rather than like learning a technique and then you learn the technique and then, well, you don't need the book anymore. So with the lunation cycle, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's talking about the relationship between the sun and the moon, sort of on a base level, and sort of the different phases it goes through. But it's applicable beyond the sun and the moon, right? It's talking about the cycle between two planets that starts with a conjunction, moves to opposition, and then comes back around to conjunction again. And that there are certain places in the cycle where you can observe sort of a tension. Like, for instance, for me, where it was most useful was when it's talking about the lunation cycle and the first quarter and the third quarter. So one of them is an opening square and one of them is a closing square. And the opening square, according to Rudhyar, represents a crisis in action, right? We've started something at the new moon phase of whatever two planets we're talking about. It begins, and when we hit the first quarter square, there's something in the action that we're taking that's hit up against something else. And we have to tweak our how we are proceeding in the action. And then the third quarter square, according to Rudhyar, is a crisis in consciousness, which is like, we've already had three quarters of the action, including the culmination of the full moon phase. And now it's about kind of trying to figure out what we've learned as the cycle is coming to a close. And so it's less of an external process and more of an internal process. And that way of differentiating between the first and the third quarter squares in any planetary cycle has been really influential for me in understanding just the relationship between any two planets, right? Because those of us that are beyond beginner know that even though it's cool to talk about planets and signs and houses, like, the aspects is where there's actually a story being told. The other things are just characters and settings, but they could all just be in their rooms, but they're not doing anything. It's only when they're interacting with each other that there's any kind of dynamism in a chart. And I know that aspects are one of the more difficult things for students going from beginner to intermediate, because you've already learned, like, I know my Mars is in Scorpio, but what is it doing? And that's harder to discuss. So the lunation cycle, which is actually, like in the title, all about the moon, is really about planetary aspects as far as I see it.
It's a relational thing and not just this individual, like, I am Mars in Scorpio or Pisces or whatever. It's more like, I'm in relationship to what other planet? What's my connection? What's my dialogue there? Like you're saying,
Absolutely. I mean, in my chart, my most notable aspect, the tightest is like a partile to like a quarter of a degree square between Mercury and Mars in fixed signs. So this is part of my know-it-allism. And I've recently been spending a lot of time chatting with someone who also has Mercury and Mars, but theirs is conjoined.
Oh.
And so Mercury Mars as an energy can be pretty spicy, but seeing how differently it plays out with them, like we can relate to each other on having a Mercury Mars thing, but like they're way more in control of theirs.
Yeah. Or I'm bringing you the waning sextile, so
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it definitely is like like it adds activity to the mind, but also, short temper, an
Oh yeah.
edge.
Oh
I
yeah.
sound like I'm angry sometimes when I'm actually not.
Yeah. Why are you so blunt? It's like, I'm not blunt. Get over it. It's not blunt. And it's like, but it could be. Is it? Is that blunt? What is blunt?
Totally.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show.
It's interesting because I don't want to include this book on my 3 on the Island, but I do want to include it here because we're talking about aspects. And it's a book that I know a lot of people have not heard of. So I'm going to make a pitch for kind of a random book. It's called Dynamics of Aspect Analysis by Bil Tierney. And it came in really handy when I hit the intermediate level because he unpacks a lot of the underpinnings of what we mean in different aspects, and then goes really deep into like squares between fixed signs versus between mutable signs, or trines in this element versus that element, or how does it work in a T-square or a yod or unaspected planets. And there's a lot more information than you typically get on aspects in other books. And I just wanted to call attention to it because it doesn't have a sexy title. And I think a lot of people have escaped
Dynamics
it.
is a great word. We like
Yeah.
dynamics. I love a dynamic,
But dynamics of aspect analysis, like if you don't really know what astrology is, like that's not gonna,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna grab that off the used bookshelf from across the room.
I'm not typing that into the search bar.
So I recommend that book, everyone.
Yeah. And that is actually one of the best books, I would say, that I've heard the older generation from where I stand, right? Just not, they're not old, they're just older than me, saying like that is actually one of the ones to read. So it's cool that you have footnoted that or left it on the tarmac or, kind of pointed in that direction as like a intermediate acceleration. One thing we're dancing around here with both of those books, though, is talking about the synodic cycles between 2 planets and where they meet and where they have their opposition and when they meet again, and just kind of learning how those relationships are timed and nested within other synodic relationships to be able to see the whole play or the whole dance or the whole century.
That's right. And then, in order to do that well, you have to know, which planet's moving faster and have some history. I mean, as the planets get slower, those synodic cycles are really important to understanding what's going on the macro level. the first one that comes to mind is, we're approaching a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is like a new moon for those planets. And the fact that it's happening the beginning of Aries is very new moony, new moon. It's like a new moon equinox in the synodic
But you
cycle,
know how,
right?
like, when it's going to be someone's birthday and you're really excited for them? Like, when I speak to people who have Saturn, Neptune, and Libra from 1953 or Saturn, Neptune, and Capricorn from the early 90s, I'm like, I'm so excited. And I ask them, what are you doing next year? Like, what is their mindset towards, like, the plans they're developing? They may or may not be aware that they're having that recurrence transit, but it's beautiful, like, to think, like, oh, you're going to begin that project or you're working on that goal. And just to see how that's going to amplify for them when the recurrence transit hits.
Totally. I was very aware of that during the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020, because I know some folks that have the Saturn-Pluto conjunction from the early 80s. And then my mother has it from the 40s.
Okay.
The one in Leo, the Pluto in Leo, Saturn and Pluto in Leo. And it was just interesting how that also was quite, I mean, you couldn't get
Momentous.
a more Saturn-Pluto conjunction thing than us all being locked in the house.
Yeah, in Capricorn, and they were both on their south nodes, like, goodbye social life.
Totally.
Because in Libra, when they conjoined in Libra, they were, that was when the AIDS epidemic was coursing. So all of a sudden sex became barriered, right? We had, like, we could still get together, but there needed to be, safe sex. And then suddenly it was in the air. So it's like, you can't even be around anybody. Like, cover your mouth, stay in your house.
Totally. Fun times.
Yeah, right? Like, okay, there's nothing happening. Not even that. Nothing. You can't
Right.
make
I mean, I
connection.
will say the only thing happening for me at that time was lots of books.
There you
God
go.
bless books. I
Yeah.
mean, saved my life during that Saturn Pluto time.
Right, right. And I was amassing all the books here at CAELi. So, under the lockdown, I'm like, I'm going to make a magical place where people can come together later when we can actually see each other.
It's
Okay.
great.
So, number 3.
Number 3, the whole time I've been vacillating, like, where do I want to go with number 3? Because I have a few different directions. I want to sort of shout out where I'm not going to go first,
Okay.
which is I thought about saying Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda, which is not an astrology book, but there is astrology mentioned in it. But again, influential for me on the sense of mysticism. And it's the first time I read like a book that I knew was well respected, where it talks about people like, disappearing and reappearing in other places as if they were just telling, any other memoir. And I love that stuff. But I'm not going to say that one. What I am going to say is just to pay homage to Mr. Robert Hand, because Planets in Transit is a book that, when I was first learning astrology, that was probably of all the cookbooks that exist in the world. When I say cookbook, I think people know what I'm talking about, which is like a description of a book that just has like, if you have this, then this is the thing. If you have that, then that's the thing. And I mean, my copy was so bookmarked, written in, bent, spilled on. And even friends that didn't know much about astrology, that was a good place for them to grab onto. And it's a great way to start thinking about transits. Again, like, to me, transits are the complementary to what I was saying about aspects, which is it's the angles that one planet makes to another, and that's where all the activity is. So for me, aspects and transits is the thing in astrology, and that other techniques work for different people, but they are, to me, more metaphorical as opposed to direct. Like, here is the angle between this planet and this other planet. It's basic harmonic. Like, if you're a math person, a physics person, a music person, you can totally latch on to that. And in fact, I'll just throw in one more thing. The Richard Tarnas classic, Cosmos and Psyche, which is a remarkable book insofar as it's an astrology book that doesn't mention astrology anywhere on the book jacket and doesn't mention anything astrological for like the first 60 or 70 pages, because it's like, it's the gateway drug kind of book. But his entire case for astrology working is based on aspects. It's not at all based on signs. It's only based on the angles between outer planets and that there's a historical correlation. So, if I could make a pitch to anyone to base their astrology in aspects and transits above all else, to me, that's the most immediately, directly clear way that astrology works.
Spoken like a phantom Hamburg school German. I mean, they were going like chuck the houses, chuck the signs. We can, and Kepler actually, Johannes Kepler started this with his own, and you said the word harmonics just now, which was great too. So, he had a telescope and he looked up and he's like, I can't see the distinction between this sign turning into that sign. There's no marker in nature that shows me that. There's no houses visible with this piece of instrument. It's very optic based, and he was into geometry as well. But he initially added the minor aspects based off of music theory and the idea of like a fourth, a fifth, an eighth. And then he got more technical and added even more minor aspects until we get this like, proliferation. But that harmony of the spheres was really a root in why he expanded that more traditional aspect set. And was trying to basically say what you're saying now, is just this idea of like, we just need to look at the aspects and the cycles, and it doesn't actually matter whether there's something in Aries or something in Capricorn. I mean, you're going to get that anyway, just based off of the orientation of the Milky Way. Like, you can't escape that sort of like neighborhood, if you want to call the Earth's position in the solar system. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's not to say, I mean, I certainly use signs and houses, and I am not suggesting we discard them, but they are a human-made meaning system, which is fine. I mean, everything, much of what we do is a human-made meaning system, but we are not making up that two planets are in an angle to one another. We are observing that. And so there's something kind of major about that.
Yeah, I had never actually thought about that distinction before, because in my mind, I think about all the ways humans have created systems of astrology. And so I try to hold that almost like a linguistic multiplicity. But I never thought about that. Like, what you're pointing out is this astronomical, observable, non-human made, like, this is a shape. We're calling it 90 degrees. We're calling it a square, but it's still always whatever that is, this angle between these two things looking at each other from our vantage point. So, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, and nothing wrong with human-made meaning systems, and I like them a lot, and I think that they take on more power when, like, for instance, with astrology, when people have been adding to that meaning system consistently over, hundreds or thousands of years, like, things take on more of a quality and they become more, I don't want to say real is the word that came to my mind, but that's not right, but just more resonant. Like, there is something about repetition of meanings that creates power and then feeds itself and then replicates itself. So I think that one of the reasons astrology is so powerful is because people have been doing this meaning system for so long and adding to it, changing it. And I agree. It's like linguistics, like, there are multiple useful meaning systems in astrology.
Yeah. It's not evolving in a direction, it's not improving, it's just changing, because there's certain things that get left on the wayside too, like the books that you tossed out of the plane on your way to this island.
I mean, I'm embarrassed to admit that when I moved to Palm Springs, I got rid of, 90 something percent of my astrology books.
Yeah.
You're like, where did the books go? They
No.
went to other astrologers.
Good.
But yeah, it was weird because then when you asked me to do this, I was like, oh, let me go look at my, oh
Oops.
crap, I don't have those books anymore. I can't read the back book jacket of Cosmos and Psyche to
Oh.
confirm my memory that it doesn't say the word astrology anywhere.
Yeah, but I mean, you can always get another one. You can
Yeah.
always pick up a new copy. Having the copy you had, there, like maybe Planets and Transits is one you'd never get rid of. But, in my experience of going through so many moves and so many books, sometimes you have to actually discard a box of books and you're like, oh, why did I do that? But if you really need it, you'll look at it again.
As I get older, again, it's another thing. It's maybe tied to like the know-it-all being less active is like sort of the acquisitional quality of knowledge, and I say that knowing there are people like you who are librarians. And so I can relax my need to acquire because I know someone else thoughtful is doing it. But I got rid of a ton of books. And it was always that thing, you read those memes like, never sleep with a guy if you go to his house and there's no book, he has no
That's a
books.
John Waters
Right.
quote.
Okay. I was like, well, I knew it came from somewhere. But like, I mean, I certainly do walk into people's houses and look for the books,
Yeah.
but I realize that it doesn't make me less of a reader to not have those books around. And it's true that I have read so much that sometimes I'll pick up a book and get 50 pages in before I realize I've read it already.
Oh man.
But, I'm trying to let them cycle through. Maybe it's also related to like, I took on a meditation practice. So it's just about like letting the things pass. So that includes my books. And if I didn't love, love, love it, I don't keep it when I'm done.
Yeah, and there's a beauty to that too, a freedom in it, you know. I think any book also has its own energetic, almost like neuron cluster that if you're around them, like even just sitting in CAELi for the last 2 or 3 years here, I can feel my brain changing and I'm not actively reading them, but I can hear their conversations in this room. The one will be like, "Oh, pick me up." And I'm like, "Oh, it's your turn. Okay." And it's just like if you're not around them, then there's this clarity, like this vipassana. I can't say the word, but some kind of meditative clarity where you're like, okay, my brain is clear. And then you get around a pile of books and you're like, nope, there's a whole conversation happening now, you know?
But the pile of books feeds the serendipity, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if I hadn't gone to the bookstore and seen the book, I might not have thought to get an astrology book. And I mean, this is one of my challenges with, music all being online, books through Kindle. And I do have a Kindle, but I only use it when I travel because you have to think in advance. What is the thing that I am seeking? And I don't want to be walked through my curiosities by an algorithm. I'd rather be walked through them with serendipity or chance, which is like bookstore, library, what's sitting in the box on the street. I lived in cities for most of my adult life. And what is the box of books that's sitting, in the moldy cardboard box on the corner of this? And like how many times I've picked up the book out of that box and brought it home. I
Yeah.
mean,
Amazing. Okay. So if you were going to toss a beginner into the mix and put a book in their hands, what would you tell someone new to astrology to read?
okay, since I already gave a few that are pretty good for that, I'm going to throw one more in.
Okay.
And that's Parkers Astrology or anything written by Derek and Julia Parker in the similar frame, because they had other books with similar titles, but it was a big hardcover, full color pictures book that was clearly intended to sit on a coffee table or be a gift, and we don't want to deny the fact that those kind of books are a real great entry place to something like astrology, which, if you just come from the perspective I did, which was the only way to learn astrology, it's very dry. There's certainly no pictures in it. And, people do need a little bit of something. But what's good about that book is it's also actually like quality beginner's astrology. So it's not like a non-astrologer wrote an intro book just to sell books. Like there's some quality astrology in it, but also it's like a book that feels good. I mean, I have on my bookshelf a copy of something that is called The Complete Astrologer by Derek and Julia Parker, which is an earlier version of that same book, but it's like super retro. And it's just a delight because, as we're saying, there's like a physical quality, a serendipitous quality. So just like maybe a picture in a book might be more appealing to someone than like flashcard keywords that you have to learn. It's like learning a language, right? And like
Yeah.
that the early stages can be very dry. So I say go for something that's full color and, a fun book.
Awesome. 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 Okay. So where can people find you if they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, so they could find me probably on Instagram would be the best place, and my handle there is astrobarry, ASTROBARRY. That was my name when I used to write horoscopes once a week. I'm mostly retired from my professional practice of astrology, and mainly I'm just involved through the orgs, through ESAR, which you and I are both involved in on the board. And so I love astrologers. I'm not writing horoscopes or seeing clients, but I can't get enough of astrologers who I will tell anyone who will listen are some of the most brilliant, interesting, curious people, because astrologers decide to study something that doesn't get mainstream respect. And if you are a curious person and you're an autodidact, like astrologers are like, oh yeah, I did this and I also, learned ancient Greek so I could translate my own text, or I'm also like a genius in physics, or they're all just interesting folks for the most part. So you'll find me in the community. You'll find me through Isar Astrology or at Astrobarry on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you. What a delight. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at CAELi.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.